This is Jimmy Church of Fade to Black, and you are in the future because you're listening to Cristina Gomez and Shifting the Paradigm.
Howdy, folks. This is Lou Elizondo, and you are listening to my very good friend Cristina Gomez on Shifting the Paradigm.
This is Ray Sobbs from the UnX Network, and you're listening to Shifting the Paradigm with the intrepid Cristina Gomez on the X.
You're listening to the UnX Network, KUNX-DB, Kansas City, Missouri.
Welcome to Shifting the Paradigm. I'm Cristina Gomez on the Paradigm Shifts channel and on the X, the new mainstream, KUNX Digital Broadcasting Talk Radio. Are you ready for this? Because we're about to embark on an hour and a half of UFO shenanigans and paranormal adventures. Right here is where we look and think outside the proverbial box. We jump down those rabbit holes where you get a red Tic Tac instead of a red pill. First off, make sure you subscribe and share these shows on social media to those who you think are having their minds and eyes open to the reality of the UFO mystery. All of these shows are great primers, and in the push for more clarity, transparency, and disclosure, the more voices demanding answers, the better. For those listening on KUNX Talk Radio and affiliates, I have 2 other shows each week that only air on my YouTube channel. Mysteries with the History is on Thursdays at 2:30 p.m. PST with my co-host Jimmy Church of Fade to Black Radio on KUNX. And each week we cover a different topic in depth. And on Fridays at 3 p.m. PST, the show Strange Paradigms is where I and a different guest co-host cover all the strange weekly news and mysterious headlines from around the world. So definitely check out my website at strangeparadigms.com for all show archives, more information, and direct video links to my channel. Let's get into some unusual news from this last week. A man, seemingly disguised as an old woman in a wheelchair, threw a piece of cake at the glass protecting the Mona Lisa at the Louvre Museum and shouted at people to think of planet Earth. The Paris Prosecutor's Office said Monday that the 36-year-old man was detained following Sunday's incident and sent to a police psychiatric unit. An investigation has been opened into the damage of cultural artifacts. The cake attack left a conspicuous white creamy smear on the glass, but the famous work by Leonardo da Vinci wasn't damaged. Security guards were filmed escorting the wig-wearing man away as he called out to the surprised visitors in the gallery. Think of the Earth. There are people who are destroying the Earth. Think about it. Artists tell you, think of the Earth. That's why I did this. While this is a rather bizarre story, the 16th century Renaissance masterpiece has seen a lot in its over 500 years in existence. The painting was stolen in 1911 by a museum employee, an event which increased the painting's international fame. And it was damaged in an acid attack perpetrated by a vandal in the 1950s, and since then has been kept behind glass. And then in 2009, a Russian woman who was angry at not being able to get a French citizenship threw a ceramic cup at it, smashing the cup but not harming the glass or the painting. What do you think of the Mona Lisa painting? Does this recent story shock you, or is it no big deal? I personally had no idea that the painting underwent an acid attack back in the 50s. I mean, the Mona Lisa may be one of the most famous paintings in the world. So the fact that someone attempted to throw a cake at it, I think symbolically is a big deal, especially for the art fanatics out there. Now, with the news out of the way, let me talk about my guest. Currently residing in Alaska, Eric Hecker is a self educated research investigator that takes from his many odd life experiences and connects with others. Eric was raised on Long Island, New York, the home of the now infamous Montauk Project. Through his childhood, he has been part of the Stargate project run by the CIA and DIA. Following that, he became a plumber for some of the wealthiest people in the world back on Long Island. Then in 2010, Eric took a contract to work at the South Pole station for a year. Always an avid researcher, it wasn't until Eric began working remotely throughout the state of Alaska that he started making connections that maybe his own life may not be what he thought it was. Let's bring in Mr. Eric Hecker. Eric, welcome to Shifting the Paradigm. How are you today?
I am doing fantastic, Christina. Thank you so much for having me on your show today.
I'm pretty excited. For those that may not be familiar with your work or research, what do you want the audience to take away from today's interview?
Oh boy, that's a very interesting and loaded question, but I will get right to the point. I want the audience to understand that what is going on down in Antarctica and the South Pole Station specifically is not what they're being told. There is very high technology, which is contemporarily being referred to as directed energy weapons systems. Stuff that we see in the news, that the ramifications of the application of these weapons is referred to as Havana syndrome. And everybody's seeing that in the news as of late. But this is the weapons platform that provides those symptoms. You know, when the government is talking about their employees suffering from Havana syndrome, it's analogous to them saying that their employees are suffering from bullet wounds. So they're discussing the problem, or I should say the symptom, but not the delivery mechanism. So what I'm discussing with the world is the delivery mechanism. That Havana syndrome is a directed energy weapons result. So the government's talking about Havana syndrome, and I'm talking about the delivery mechanism. Where does Havana syndrome come from is not something the government wants to talk about. But there's a new level of warfare going on this planet. That's what people need to learn about.
And we're going to get a little bit more into that a little bit later. But first, let's kind of start off with your background. You grew up in Levittown, Long Island, New York. And this town was specifically built in mind for post World War II veterans back in the late 40s into the 50s. And you were born in the 70s. So, how did growing up around a town filled with war veterans shape your worldview as a child?
Well, I guess it probably had more to do with a guiding hand. It appears that Levittown, Long Island, being the first suburb of the United States of America, like you said, for post World War II veterans, it appears that there were other programs that just continued in this environment. And we're learning about things nowadays known as the Stargate program, which was a remote viewing program. And things like this were being applied to elementary school level children like myself, back in the late 70s, early 80s for myself, and then other generations both fore and aft of when I was involved with such programs.
Can you explain what the Stargate program is and what they did to you in order for you to come up with the conclusion that you were a part of the program as a child?
Absolutely, Christina. The Stargate program was a function of the CIA, and they started to want to study consciousness and what that really meant. And they were working off of a book by a gentleman named Itzhak Bentov. His book was called Stalking the Wild Pendulum on the Mechanics of Consciousness. And it was this book, as well as the practices of the Monroe Institute, which was started by Robert Monroe. And it was the CIA's basis for consciousness studies that the Stargate program got into remote viewing, and they were working with both adults and children, both knowing and unknowingly, to basically, I guess, just work in the science of in time travel, technically. I mean, because they were getting out of body, is one way of putting it. That the ability for a person to have information is normally understood to come from somewhere. But what the CIA was learning in the Stargate program is that it was possible for somebody to know something without really having a reason to know it. If they didn't have any direct experience in their life, if they weren't taught anything about a topic, they could still definitively be right on something. And this was blowing the minds of the folks over at the CIA when they were being presented the expertise of folks like Ingo Swann and the remote viewers from the time period that the CIA was tapping to start these training programs. The paradigm was shifting back then, that consciousness had a tangible value. And the CIA didn't really care so much to really understand consciousness as they cared a lot on how to use it, up until the point where some people would say that they were abusing it.
And going into a little bit more depth with your childhood experience, you were enrolled in a Catholic school from kindergarten till about the eighth grade, where different experiments took place, such as learning to remote view in a library. Can you walk us through some of the most memorable tests that you endured?
I can, but it is still kind of vague. I can give you a general overview of what the library remote viewing experiences was like. More or less, they would first draw us out from the classroom, and they would pump our egos as children. They would tell us, you're so smart, you're so this, you're so that. They really wanted us to feel exceptional, and we absolutely did. Our egos were solidly boosted. We thought we were something special. And when we got to the library, basically the first thing that they did is that they administered eye drops to us, and they would caution us, to tilt our head back. They would put a tissue by the corner of our eye and warn us to stay still so that it wouldn't get on our uniforms and stain our uniforms. Apparently, it was a staining solution, and we certainly knew in the strict regimented Catholic school that we were in that staining our uniforms was verboten and you get in trouble. So we just basically listened. I have spoken to my father since, and this was news to him. He had no idea that we were being administered eye drops in the library when I was a child. So this was unbeknownst to him and unapproved. So that is going on behind closed doors, folks. Pay close attention to that aspect of reality. But with that being said, they would give us eye drops and then proceed to run us through what I now know is the motions of the Monroe Institute remote viewing protocols. When I was a child, they were not being forthwith in our direction, and they didn't tell us exactly what we were up to. So it seemed very bizarre, the activity. But they were going through the motions of the remote viewing process, and they were working us as remote viewers. They would have us do uh, the the ideogram, basically, which was just a squiggly line on the paper. And then utilizing that line as a tool and being guided, we had handlers at the table, and they would ask us questions and write down our answers. And from our perspective, they seemed very benign, but that's how these remote viewing teams work oftentimes. So I didn't necessarily know what they were asking me questions about. They could say something like, Eric, do you see trees or mountains? And I would answer the question, I see trees. I wouldn't know why they were asking me the question, but it mattered to them. And apparently my ability to see and answer those questions had some level of accuracy because they continued to bring me in there and utilize me for these remote viewing programs.
And was it all the students in the school that went through these tests, or was it only a select few?
From my understanding, it was a select few that was being treated the way that I was in the library. I do not want to discount the processing of children in this equation, though. I believe that I was processed as a child in a peculiar way. I believe that our children are going through a grinder of process, that the other children that weren't in the library for the process that I was going through were probably just being processed in some other capacity because their standardized tests said that they were capable of doing some other thing. I think I think the people of the world need to know that our children are being not handled in a way that they would approve of when they let them go to school every day.
You said that you spoke to your father not too long ago about this, so it must have been
Mhm,
way after you got out of school and all of this. And his expression, to my understanding, was it was kind of like shocked, but
mhm.
also stating, "This is not what I wanted for my child." Is there anything else that you spoke about with your father in relation to these experiments?
Oh, absolutely. There was there were times in this same school that we were removed from the premises for what we were told were retreats, which are supposed to be holy endeavors, and that was the pretense. And it turned out we were being brought to a different site on Long Island that has since been knocked down. The property was previously called Inishfada, which is Gaelic, and that I believe it was Gaelic for Long Island. And at the time the house was built, it was the fourth largest house in the United States of America, built by the Brady family, and they were very connected with the Jesuits, and the Jesuits are very connected with child abuse. And we used to get bused to this Inishfada property on Long Island under the pretenses of it being a holy retreat. And the vast majority of children that were being bused to this property were probably getting some, cover story of it being some, prayers and stuff for the day. But a certain portion of us were being siphoned off from the herd of children there for the day, and we were brought to different quarters. And what we were involved with, what is now referred to as satanic ritual abuse. And I was taken with boys from my school, and we were met in areas with girls from other schools, and we were made to perform in front of rooms of adults.
And for those that have gone through a type of trauma in their life, such as this one, what advice do you have for them to overcome it?
Tell the truth. It's okay. It's all right. Pretty much this has almost happened to almost everybody out there. But the problem is that we have these mechanisms to push this stuff in the backs of our minds. This is how Mother Nature protects children. It's very natural. So what people need to do is just start to get very comfortable with the nature of who they are. And if things happen to you that were odd when you were a kid, just communicate them. That's all. It's not that hard, actually. You'll find that there's a lot of folks out there that weren't particularly treated well as children, and the best thing that we can do as aspiring adults is to do the right things for the kids out there and break this chain. There's a lot of stuff going on this planet that's just not right, and it impacts the kids negatively.
It does. And you said to tell the truth. Speak the truth to whom?
To everybody that you meet, this is not a conversation that anybody should be ashamed of. This is stuff that should be conversational and topical. Learning how to help the kids for the benefit of the kids on any given day is a great conversation for anybody in humanity. So if we can't discuss the things that are currently detrimental to children or have been systemically detrimental to children, I mean, what kind of human beings are we?
It goes so deep into our DNA, and it flows through our blood to always take
Mhm,
care of our young. And for
mhm,
those that don't, it really does shock me. Well,
mhm.
you ended up using all of these childhood experiences as your strength. How have your experiences influenced your research today?
My experiences, I guess I would say, have influenced my research in as so far as that I know they're so original to me, so I feel obligated to express them. That if I feel if not me, then who? You know, the stuff that I've seen has been so odd and off the wall that if I don't communicate my experiences to folks, I really I honestly feel the world is going to be in harm's way. I've seen too much danger and precarious circumstances. You know, people talk about nowadays like black hats and white hats and stuff like that. And I guess I got to seriously just throw the white hat on and start screaming from the hills that I've seen stuff that the bad people are up to. You know, this is my Antarctic experience at South Pole. I'm trying to let folks know that there's bad stuff out there beyond their comprehension currently. So my experiences motivate me to share the truth because I'm aware of a truth that's not being told.
You just mentioned black hats and white hats. What does that mean?
That's I guess contemporary terminology with all of the factions that are battling right now. You know, I know a lot of folks think that it's as simple as Democrat and Republican, but boy, I wish it was that simple. There's a lot of stuff going on. There's good people in one side, there's good people on the other side, there's bad people both ways, there's people all over the place. So the simple terminology, I think, for the baseline, we the people, is that every faction has good people and bad in it, and the black hats represent bad people, and the white hats represent hopefully good people. And there's an idea that the white hats need to, I guess, in a way, infiltrate some of the more nefarious aspects of black hatry so that we can figure out what's going on and mitigate those problems. So that's kind of where I look at my experiences at the South Pole Station. Certainly, there's a fistful of people that have gone down there, but nobody's really come out of there with the documentation that I have and the statements that I have. And to me, that's just a testament to everybody else seems to just be very well compartmentalized.
So let's get into your experience with Antarctica, 'cause it's kind of a funny story getting into it. So in 2010, you were having difficulty finding work in New York as a plumber. So you began to look outside of the area. And there was one application that was addressed to be in Colorado. And turns out that was just the hiring office, but the actual job was in Antarctica. I mean, that's
Mhm.
a rather crucial detail that they seem to deliberately leave out. So,
Absolutely.
I mean, I thought that was insane. When
Mhm.
you found out there was vacancy in Antarctica, what made you want to go? Because that's a very big difference compared to Colorado. I
Mhm.
mean, um, you could have applied for any other job in your area. So why did you decide to go to the South Pole to be a plumber?
The easy answer is that I never wanted to go to the South Pole to be a plumber. There were literally no other jobs at the time. There was only 2 applications in the whole country that I applied to. There was no one hiring. That was what the current administration had done to the economy at the time. And so I got notification from the hiring facility in Colorado that the position was actually in Antarctica, and I instantaneously was like, I don't want anything to do with that. And I went to the other position that I applied to, and I tried pushing harder in that direction to get that job. And it didn't pan out. And obviously, long story short, I wound up spending a year at the South Pole Station, not because I had a desire to, but it was because it was the only corporation on the face of the earth at the time that was willing to cut me a check.
Did you ever consider applying for a different type of job, or were you just kind of stuck onto doing plumbing?
I had absolutely targeted the plumbing because that's my expertise. That is my background. I mean, that is certainly what I'm very good at. They didn't bring me all the way down to the South Pole to plumb because I'm not good at it.
So, as soon as you got accepted, what was going through your mind during that moment, or even when you were getting on the plane to your new home? Like, what were you
Ooh.
feeling? What were you thinking?
It was wild. For starters, I mean, being on Long Island in New York in the summertime, trying to plan to get winter stuff for South Pole was rather challenging. But beyond that, when I started getting into the flights and the training, I mean, they first brought us from I went from New York to Colorado to pick up on some training modules and things like that before they transitioned us further down south. It was wild. I mean, they were sending us with a whole bunch of people transiting kind of in the same direction. There was other people from it's the United States Antarctic Program, appropriately titled. So all of us other, program folks were headed down south. We went to LAX, then we went to Auckland, New Zealand, and then we got to Christchurch, New Zealand, which was amazing. Christchurch, New Zealand's beautiful. And we got hung up there for a few days before we went further south.
Oh my goodness. Eric, there's a break coming. We'll be right back.
Your 1 million gigawatt paranormal powerhouse, KUNX-DB, The X.
This is Micah Hanks of the Micah Hanks program right here on KUNX. And right now, you're having your paradigm shifted by the one and only Cristina Gomez.
If this is true, we should listen and be grateful.
Your new source for alternative talk radio on the internet. The X.
Howdy, folks. This is Lou Elizondo, and you are listening to my very good friend Cristina Gomez on Shifting the Paradigm.
Do you have an interest in the paranormal? Then you'll love the unxnetwork.com. The X is your streaming audio and video for everything supernatural, strange, and mysterious, like UFOs, Bigfoot, ghosts, and so much more. From hosts like Jimmy Church, Whitley Strieber, Micah Hanks, and Cristina Gomez. Visit the unxnetwork.com show page for a complete list of all the paranormal programs you'll find on the X. Be sure to follow us on Twitter for updates at KUNXDB. Follow our Facebook group, UNX Network. Find the podcast on Spotify, iHeart, Audible, and Apple Podcast. It's time.
It's new.
It's the X.
So, you love talk radio? Then you'll love TalkStreamLive.com. TalkStream Live is always on, 24/7 with the best streaming talk shows. Find your favorite talkers and discover some new ones. It's free, readily available online or on mobile with any smartphone or tablet. Finding your favorite talk shows all in one place has gotten a whole lot easier. Just go to TalkStreamLive.com. Be sure to download the free apps from Google Play or the iTunes App Store.
Explaining
The unexplained.
the new unxnetwork.com.
Hi. This is Race Hobbs, head of programming at the new UNX Network, and you're locked on Shifting the Paradigm with the intrepid Cristina Gomez on the X.
This is Jimmy Church of Fade to Black, and you are in the future because you're listening to Cristina Gomez and Shifting the Paradigm.
I'm gonna chase it, and I'm gonna chase it. I know we can't ignore it, no matter how hard we try. And I'm gonna chase it, and I'm gonna chase it. I know we can't ignore it, no matter how hard we try. Fire in the veins, I fight to gain, breaking all the rules to keep me sane.
Welcome back to Shifting the Paradigm. With me is Eric HECKER. On your website, you shared the UAP preliminary report that was released in June of last year. What were your thoughts on the UAP hearing that happened on May 17th in comparison to the report released last year?
A continued farce. No truth is going to come from any direction associated to the United States federal government. It is not their job to tell you the truth. They've been lying to you for decades. They will continue to lie to you. That's what's going on. There's all kinds of supposed whistleblowers coming out of the direction of the U.S. federal government. Oddly enough, these supposed whistleblowers used to be paid to lie to you. Now we're being told they're being unpaid to tell you the truth. Boy, what a bunch of malarkey that is.
During your 1-year stay in Antarctica, you saw some kind of fireball in the sky. What happened?
Oh, that's a great question, Christina, because I didn't know 100% at first, but I've learned correctly since. I was walking back, doing my rounds. I have to go to all these different outbuildings and check on things as part of my daily routine. And I was walking back to the elevated station from what we call the dark sector, which is where there's a bunch of science telescopes and things like that I was checking on. The way that the weather can be sometimes when you're walking around is that there can be snow blowing from the ground up until, just about eyeball height, top of your head. So as I was walking back towards the elevated station, the weather conditions were that way. And I was trying to just lift my gaze up a little bit to see if maybe I could see over the snow to get a glimpse of the elevated station to see how much further I had to walk. And as I had lifted my head up out of this, fuzz of the snow blowing by, looking now into the clear sky, from my left, which at the time was what we would call grid north, which is the direction that the elevated station faces. From grid north, I was seeing this giant flaming fireball zip across the sky at the South Pole over the elevated station. I could see like these craggly marks on it. I could see the flames. I could see there was a trail behind it that was pretty much a flame, which I would say like almost like 1/3 of the smoke trail, and then the rest of the 2/3 was smoky. But this whole thing shot across the sky from my far left all the way to my far right, which is unobstructed view. There's just flat ice there at the South Pole, and I can't even begin to imagine the distance from horizon to horizon, how fast this object went. and it went pin straight without deviation. It didn't go from up to down. It went from a height that was relatively low altitude straight across my view and all the way out to the horizon. At the time, in my brain, I was thinking, wow, that's insane. That was like a freaking planet-sized meteor or something that just ripped through the atmosphere. Since then, I've learned that what I saw is a type of UFO on the list of types of UFOs. I didn't know that there was a flaming ball type UFO at the time that I witnessed it. My understanding of UFOs at the time was, like a flat disc with a glass dome on the top and flashy lights and two green guys waving at you. My brain wasn't really at that idea that this is a known UFO shape. I was thinking of it as just the coolest, largest meteor that could possibly, I guess, somehow make it through the atmosphere completely intact.
You kind of touched on the environment of Antarctica. What was it like to step foot on the icy land for the first time?
Interesting. So the first time I stepped on the ice at the South Pole Station, we had just dropped in a C-130 Hercules. They had opened the rear door, dumped all of our gear off the back while we were in motion. So it was a pretty wild landing. All these Air Force pilots are just launching out the back of the plane as we were on the skiway. So that was pretty uncommon. We didn't even know we were on the ground yet at the time. We had such a soft landing. But then upon exiting the Herc, this was actually an event for me. There's an airman at the port watch door, and as we're getting let out, the propellers for the plane are still at idle speed, which is enough to make you, mincemeat. But as you walk out the door, the airman turns to me and he goes, "Make a right," which at the time I found rather insulting because it was like, did you think that I was going to walk into the propeller? So that was my first step into Antarctica. Was I felt slightly insulted that the airman thought that I was dumb enough to walk into the props, so he felt obligated to tell me to make a right.
And the reason to why I ask about the environment is from an outsider's perspective, it's pretty brutal. And then
Oh
you
yes.
had your own practically what you would consider a UFO sighting.
Mhm.
So there are those that believe that Antarctica has their own alien bases and a lot of secrets. What are
Mhm.
your thoughts on that?
I I agree 100% actually. I don't doubt that all possibility exists always. I think Antarctica has a rich history of nefarious activities and factions involved. I want all kinds of studies and attention to be put down onto the seventh continent. I think it's a very important conversation piece that not enough people are talking about. I think there's a lot of misinformation. I think there's a lot of disinformation, but I think we need to get to the facts of the matter. I think there's a lot going on down there. I think that Admiral Byrd went down there and learned a lot. I think that we had Operation Deep Freeze going on for quite some time. I have worked with quite a few folks myself, one of which is John Warner the Fourth. He's the son of John Warner the Third, former senator of Virginia. He passed away this past year, but before passing away, he let his son know that in his previous role as Secretary of the Navy, which put him in charge of Operation Deep Freeze down in Antarctica, that there was a secret submarine base and that the submarines were down there under the ice. This is the United States Navy. This is the former Secretary of the Navy. And when his son asked him what these submarines were doing down there, his father stated space operations. So this is a big deal that a lot of folks, there is a lot going on with the UFO and the UAP community. But the reality is that only the government contemporarily is making this a new conversation. because they've been forced to stop lying about it. But now that they're showing up to the table, they're showing up behind everybody else in the conversation because they're not being forthwith. The only thing that's changed in the disclosure community because of the government is that the doors have been left open and unlocked. Everybody's waiting for the government to speak truth, and they're never going to. They simply just left the doors unlocked for the rest of the truth speakers to come through because the other people don't have liability. The government does. The government can't speak the truth. They're too liable.
Where can people get the information to know more about Antarctica, and how are they able to decipher the truth from the fiction?
They should start with people who have direct firsthand experience, would be my understanding. I mean, why would you listen to somebody tell a story about something that they've never experienced when you have the option to choose somebody who has had the experience? I find that wildly interesting. I mean, myself, I spent a year at the South Pole Station. I see a lot of people talking about what's going on in Antarctica, and I find it very interesting because to me, it's my home. It's my family. I've been there. And I think, Christina, you would find it really funny if people started talking about your home and your family if they've never been in your house.
A little bit earlier, you mentioned Admiral Byrd, and he's pretty
Mhm.
important in the history of Antarctica. Tell us
Absolutely.
about him.
Well, Admiral Byrd basically did some of the best first reconnaissance down in Antarctica and South Pole, especially by his flyovers and the such. And a lot of his crew, for example, there was a gentleman by the name of Lloyd Berkner who went on to continue a lot of the peculiar science that was going on in Antarctica. And Lloyd Berkner went on over to Brookhaven National Labs, and that situation seems to be very CIA connected. So it seems that Admiral Byrd discovered something very important when he went down there. He went down as the leader. So now Byrd was a researcher at this point. He was not an admiral by U.S. Navy commission. He was a civilian researcher at this point who was put to task of being in charge of a military fleet again under the false pretenses of it being research. Apparently, when Byrd's expedition went down to Antarctica, they wound up engaging with some unfriendlies, getting their fleet decimated, and then their mission classified. So when they came back, nobody was really allowed to talk about what occurred, but they came back with a fraction of the fleet that they left with.
Can you go into a little more detail on that? How did their craft get fractured?
You got it. So there's a researcher by the name of Brad Olson who I've met at some conferences, and he covers the topic very well. If people want to get more facts, because I'm a horrible teacher, I'm a better student. But Brad Olson is a greater orator on the topic. But effectively, when the American faction went down to Antarctica, they encountered unfriendlies, which are believed to have been a Nazi faction that has the technology of anti-gravity available to them at that time. And that Byrd's fleet was actually, like they said, some of the ships were cut in two by the technology that they came across. So it was really that they were outgunned, outmatched, and just it didn't do well for them. They got decimated.
Yeah, Antarctica has a really fascinating history, a lot of very interesting stories, but also the landscape is pretty interesting. During your time there, did you ever visit the Blood Falls?
No, I did not. I did not spend much time on the coast. I've seen videos of that and it looks very cool. But my time, I spent 366 days straight in Antarctica with, I would say, 12 hours ish on the front and back end. I spent on the coast at McMurdo Base, but the rest of it I spent at South Pole proper.
So you actually answered my next question about McMurdo. For those that aren't familiar with this landscape, why is it so fascinating?
It is magnificent desolation was the term used in the lunar program. I forget by which astronaut, but I would say that South Pole pretty much is the exact same thing. There's nothing there, and it is in that it's magnificent. There's nothing on the ground. It is just flat ice. There's not a peep. There's not a sound. If there's no wind, on a cold day in the winter when there's no wind, I could walk from building to building, and if I stopped, there was no noise, and I could hear my blood circulating in my body. That's how quiet it was around you. The amount of silence about you, you could there's nothing else to hear. I mean, your body, it's amazing the way it's an amazing experience at the South Pole to have a different understanding of yourself, your body, everything about you. These are the odd things that you learn. So, yes, walking 3/4 of a mile from one building to another in the darkness of winter at the South Pole on a day with no wind, it is so quiet. You hear your blood circulating. Your heartbeat is loud in you. There's nothing else. It is sensory deprivation beyond one's comprehension.
So when you first moved there, how did that make you feel? Just not really being able to hear anything.
That came later on in the winter time. I was first there in the summertime, and it was very noisy in the summertime. The station was flush with activity. We had C-130 Hercules coming and going constantly, and even if they weren't coming and going, they were parked and they were idling. The airmen were terrified of turning the planes off and getting stuck there, so they didn't. The Jamesways tents that we slept in the summer season were right next to the skiway, and I had gotten so acclimated to having a flight line of airplanes idling next to me when I was sleeping that when the winter season switched and I got moved to the elevated station, I couldn't sleep because it was so quiet in there. I was begging to have a plane parked near me again.
In some cases, that can kind of play with your sanity. And I don't think people realize that. What about for yourself? Did you realize anything about yourself that you didn't, or what did you learn during your stay?
Christina, doing a year at the South Pole Station is a challenge of sanity. There's no question to be asked on that. They gave us psychological evaluations before, during, after. It is a taxing environment physically and mentally. 1,000%. There were very challenging mental moments for me there. When I was there, approximately the 6-month mark, I was having difficulties remembering things from off the ice. It was very challenging. I was thinking in my head that the 6 months that I had been there was already feeling like forever. And if 6 months feels like forever and I have 6 months to go, it was like, whoa, I have forever to go, eh?
So then my next question would be, what helped you persevere when you were there?
Personal interactions and human contact, so to say, being human. The sensory deprivation, like I mentioned before, is off the walls. There's nothing going on. Um, Take every joy that you have in life right now, put it on a list and remove it, and that's South Pole. What made us get by was creativity and the desire to. We were trained in certain psychological understandings of morale prior to departing. We were trained to pay attention to each other, to care for each other in a more formal way than most people are accustomed to, because it was both a job and a way of life. And we understood that once those planes left and there was only 49 souls left at South Pole Station to fend for each other, that's That's it. Whether you like these people or not, you're going to figure it out and you're going to care for each other and make this happen. So there was a lot to be said for the mentality of it and just the desire. So we would make events. We would host parties. You would just take it upon yourself to say, "Hey, this Friday night, um, there's going to be a dance party in the TV lounge instead of regular activities." And you put up posters and you make things happen. And people just took it upon themselves to make it a community. It's really community building stuff and having a desire to care about your neighbor.
And before your arrival there or during, did you have to go through any type of training, like psychological training, or do you think that your childhood experiences of being a part of the Stargate program somewhat prepared you for your 1 year?
I think there's a lot to be said for the programs that I was involved with as a child that had led me in this direction for sure. I feel kind of pre-selected in a way. But with that being said, there was also um, a fistful of other training. We were given first responder medical training. I was sent to a firefighter school to learn how to do industrial firefighting because I took that role on at the station as well. I was every time the fire alarms went off, I was the first person in to figure out what was going on in full SCBA and stuff like that as well. So besides plumbing, I was a firefighter there. I also had medical response training that we had to go through. And then we also, as a crew, were given like psychological morale boosting training we were given as well to pay attention to where people's brains were at and how they were feeling. Again, it's a extremely taxing environment. It's fatiguing. It's challenging. We were taught how to eat better. I mean, we had to learn how to consume calories at a rate that we were unfamiliar with. The environment, we were eating somewhere between probably easily 12 to 15,000 calories a day while losing weight. And we had to challenge ourselves to consume mass amounts of, as we looked at it at that place, was fuel. I mean, food was fuel. If I was going to go out in the elements, which could be down to minus 90 degrees ambient, at that point, my body is trying to fire its furnace to keep me warm. And it's going to do that. But it's going to start consuming fuel, which is either going to be in my stomach or my body. So, people have stored fat, normally don't ever have to really do it. And that's why we have all these obese people around. But I assure you, if you spend a winter at South Pole Station, you're going to lose weight because your body's going to fuel that fire. And if you didn't ingest the food that morning, it's just going to start sucking it right out of you.
Of course, that makes perfect sense. Did the conversation of the Perry Reese map ever come up with those on the base?
That was not on my radar at the time, unfortunately. Um, the complete mystery of Antarctica didn't really cross my mind until I had gotten off of the ice. But I do find the Perry Reese map extremely important in the Antarctic conversation.
So, how did you end up hearing about it?
The Perry Reese map I found out about afterwards in my studies because I wanted to learn, what really is going on with this continent and how long have we been dealing with it. I mean, I've certainly learned that the history of this planet has been, really hidden from us. And the Perry Reese map is a good example. And Antarctica in general is a fantastic example of how we've all been, deeply deluded to the history of this planet. The Perry Reese map is a great example of, people knew stuff before that we haven't been told right now.
Exactly. And for those that are not familiar with this map, can you briefly explain the content in it or how it was created?
I don't know so much how it was created per se, but the content in it is that of the Antarctic continent, the land mass without the ice on it, which is interesting in a couple of ways. One, obviously, because Admiral Perry Reese was able to ascertain this and have it. But the other consideration is that a lot of folks don't want to discuss is how fast do glaciers accrete? How fast do they grow? I mean, a lot of the conversation we have contemporarily about, climate change and global warming and all that stuff, which, don't get me wrong, climates do change. That's a fact of life because they haven't stayed the same forever, so they do change. But we've oftentimes discussed how fast glaciers retreat. Fair question. But when people bring that up, I ask them, do they know how fast glaciers grow? Because that seems to be really left out of the conversation. And a lot of people have no idea how fast glaciers grow. So that's another conversation piece for the Peary-Reese map. Is it profound that the admiral was getting information that was so old because it predated when the ice was there, of our understanding of the rate that ice grows and glaciates? Or is the question that he saw land because what people are being told nowadays is a lie about how fast the ice can grow?
Yeah, that's definitely not a conversation that people speak about. How fast do glaciers grow? That's a great point. Eric, there is another break coming. Hang tight. We'll be right back.
Million gigawatt paranormal powerhouse, KUNX-DB, The X.
This is Jimmy Church of Fade to Black, and you are in the future because you're listening to Cristina Gomez and Shifting the Paradigm.
I want to thank all of you for listening to The X. But did you know you can watch live streaming video and catch your favorite video casts on the UNX Network YouTube channel?
Wow, you mean I can watch the X shows anytime?
That's right. Watch any show, anytime, even binge watch your favorite programs.
Which shows are on the UNX Network YouTube channel?
You can watch Most Haunted with Dan Terry, Entity Voices, Paranormal Evidence, Paranormally Blonde, and Unexplained Phenomena Australia, and many more. Also, be sure and catch live coverage of special events and special broadcasts from the UNX Network.
That's great. I'm going to subscribe to the UNX Network channel right now.
Awesome. You can find everything you need to know about the YouTube channel at unxnetwork.com. That's unxnetwork.com. It's your one-stop shop for everything unexplained. It's the new mainstream. It's the UNX Network.
Explaining
The unexplained.
the new unxnetwork.com.
Are you ready to read about true paranormal events? UNX Media publishes nonfiction books about UFOs, ghosts and haunted places, time anomalies, cryptid creatures, and more. Just like KUNX-DB Radio, it's all about unexplained phenomena. Visit www.unxmedia.com to see our list of great book titles by Debbie Ziegelmeyer, Gene Walker, Devin Listrom, Wayne Lawrence, Bill Spicer, and yours truly, Margie Kay. That's unxmedia.com.
Gold loves chaos, uncertainty, and disarray. History shows us what gold does when people aren't sure about the government, the stock market, their jobs, or their retirement savings. Our national debt is skyrocketing. Gold and other precious metals are a defense measure against inflation and a stock market that might take years to recover. So what can you do right now to protect yourself? Call United Gold Group. We offer gold and other precious metals delivered securely within 72 hours. Are you worried about the stock market, we can also help you set up a real gold or silver IRA or a 401k. Safe and secure. United Gold Group makes gold ownership affordable. Call now and get up to $2,500 in free gold or silver with a qualified IRA. Call 800-753-8534. That's 800-753-8534 or visit UnitedGoldGroup.com.
Alaska, did you really start putting the pieces together of your past life experiences and delved deep into your research, where you post on your website and your YouTube channel at decipher.tv? Can you tell us about Decipher TV?
Absolutely, yeah. Deciphering.tv is my best effort at trying to get the truth out there without all the censorship. As we know, there's all kinds of platforms that, people have to deal with typically to get the information out there, and that certainly gets to the most people the fastest. But unfortunately, there's censorship. So deciphering.tv is my own website, and I certainly do not have the following of these other platforms, but I don't have censorship and I have the truth. I have my archives section where I take documents that I have that corroborate the information that I'm putting out there to let people know what's going on. So it's just a way for me to communicate the truth to folks in the seas of misinformation and disinformation that exist as of late. Unfortunately, this seems to be the way of the future of the world with all of the attacks on freedom of speech. I highly suggest everybody gets a website now. There's really no way to protect your voice in the future without one.
And living in Alaska, have you looked into the Alaskan Triangle?
I have, Christina. I've looked into the Alaskan Triangle. I've been featured on the show The Alaska Triangle, season 2, episode 9. I was a host, and they sent me out to Ketchikan, Alaska, to look for submerged, I guess you call them unidentified submerged objects, USOs. So that episode aired, and oddly enough, the producers of the show edited out everything that I found and made it out like I didn't find anything, which I found really interesting. So I'm very aware of the Alaska Triangle concept. I'm also aware of the television show. And I'm also aware of the fact that they're editing out the truth.
What did you find?
I found signs of activity under the water, which is what they wanted me to do. My history in the submarine service and basically just what I know. They sent me out there to look for sounds of unidentified submerged objects under the water and get recordings. I got them clear as day, and they did not present them to the public. They presented other sounds and other information, and they edited out the truth. I found exactly what they were looking for, and they presented a show that showed something else.
What kind of sounds did you collect? And
The
record.
sound was exactly like this, Christina. So the sounds that they put on the show, they made it out like it couldn't be heard by the human ear, and that it needed to be washed through a sound engineer to see what was going on. But the sound that I heard, clear as day, through the hydrophone, and I presented it to both the cameraman and the captain of the boat. We recorded this when we were there, and they edited, but this was the sound. Very repetitive, very mechanical, very non-organic. And we caught it clear as day. I mean, this is what submarines do. This is what sonar techs do. They go out in the ocean and they look for sounds exactly like that. And then they say, that's a boat. That's a this, that's a that. And then they shoot at it because they have that much clarity. But for some reason, the producers of this show, when I found exactly the sounds they were looking for, they decided to omit it from production.
So that sound that you just demonstrated, do you know what could have caused a sound like that, or do you know what the source could have been?
Something unnatural, something man-made or other than man-made. It wasn't a whale, it wasn't a flow, it wasn't any organic sound. It was something mechanical. It was something repetitive. It had frequency. It was exactly what everybody who's trained to look for sound underwater for is just trained to look for. That was a hit. That's what they sent me to find. At the time, everybody agreed that that's exactly what they sent me to find.
That's somewhat disappointing to hear that story where they gave you a job, you did your job correctly, but apparently it wasn't good enough, or it wasn't what they were looking for.
Or it's disinformation, and production companies do this all the time. It's called a controlled narrative and a limited hangout. They only want so much truth coming out so fast, and folks like me bump that narrative because I'm in a rush, because we, the people, deserve to know the truth. And I'm tired of all of the rich people controlling the truth. That's all this is. It's a television program. There's money behind it. I get it.
Yeah, we all want that transparency, and it's unfortunate that sometimes money rules over the truth.
Mhm.
In your time living in Alaska, which you're still living there now, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
So, what have you learned about the area in the sense of mysterious research, maybe such as the Alaskan Pyramid?
Ooh, I've actually gone and traveled over in the area of the Alaskan Pyramid over in Mount Hayes because I'm very interested in it. I've also made some pit stops over to Gakona, Alaska, where the HARP array is, because that's also on my radar. Tesla technology is very important. And I've seen a couple of UFOs here in Alaska. There's sightings here all the time. There's some Facebook pages that I follow, and the amount of activity for UFOs in Alaska is really off the wall. I've seen stuff out on hikes on multiple occasions. I've gotten pictures a couple of times. My roommate's gotten pictures a couple of times. It's all over the place up here. Alaska is just rampant with paranormal activity. The remote viewers from way back when, I believe it was Pat Price and Joe McGonigal, were the folks that remote viewed underneath Mount Hayes, which is where they basically said that there's, I guess the best way to put it would be almost like an intergalactic airport is supposedly going on there.
Just now you mentioned HARP, and on your website you have multiple declassified documents, one of them being a DARPA report from 1999. So my question is, for the stories that you've encountered or the research that you've done, what is the connection between HARP and DARPA?
Ooh, mind control would be the connection between HARP and DARPA. There's something known as V2K, which they call voice to skull. And the idea is that they can put voices in your head. You'll start seeing ads soon. I just saw one recently for underwater earbuds, headphones, whatever you want to call them, and it says that it's waterproof, and it's the way that this device functions is that it puts a signal from this headband on your head, and it goes to the bones in your head, and that's where it transmits to. This is V2K tech. They're just doing it with the headband closer, and they're selling you the product. So now they're profiting off of this technology where they can transmit a sound into your skull. When they say that they're vibrating the bones in your head, it means the parts inside your inner eardrum. That can also be done remotely with some really savage high tech. So this is what V2K means, is they can put a voice in your head from great distance. It doesn't have to be on a headband like they're going to start charging you for. So the other oddity is that they learned from the Stargate program and remote viewing and all these CIA technologies back in the day, is not only can they put a thought in your head, so to say, they can also listen to you first, and they can put that thought in your head in your own voice. So now it screams of our ancients in the mystery schools of old. There was an old term. They said, know thyself. Because the technologies nowadays, folks, are just bastardizations of techniques of old. And just like way back when a magician could walk past you and like a Jedi, put a thought in your head and say, these are not the droids that you're looking for. And one would agree. That person that said these droids are not the droids you're looking for was saying it to that other person in the voice in their head. And that was a technique. And it was doable. And they would have called it magic. Contemporarily, we have technology. And it's nefarious. But it can do the same thing. It could just simply say something like, it's all right. A mask is no big deal. Just put it on.
And just
Is that
now,
your voice effectively, or is it an implanted voice? If you don't know thyself, if you don't know that these technologies and techniques existed, you're just going to suffer them.
the biggest thing is definitely to know yourself. You're right, but in this day and age, it's becoming more and more difficult. I mean, we're being
Mhm.
fed entertainment, being on our phones all day, trying to see, oh, what does the celebrity like, to know what I like, fashion, colors, foods, and
Mhm.
things like that. So now more than ever, it seems to be very difficult. And just now, I got a little bit ahead of myself. Can you
Mhm.
please explain what DARPA is and what HARP is?
Absolutely. So DARPA is, I'm going to try to get the acronym correctly. It's the Defense Agency Research Projects, something or other. Basically, it's the U.S. federal government's ability to experiment in anything, any kind of weapon, any technology, anything that's off the wall, space related. That's what DARPA does. HARP, on the other hand, is a transmitter array. It's basically a phased array transmitter of a whole bunch of uh, Tesla coils in a way. It's a large scale Tesla coil phased array system that we have one up here in an area known as Gakona, Alaska. And they refer to it as an ionospheric heater, which first and foremost, by title, when people talk about global warming and it being man-made, I don't know, why don't you ask the people that run HARP, which the ionosphere is the atmosphere. So when they call it an ionospheric heater, maybe ask the federal government why the temperature is rising, because they have atmospheric heaters in their arsenal. So I get that people can say that global warming is going on, climate change is going on, but not under the pretenses that you're being presented, folks. There's a massive amount of other technology that you're not being presented. HARP being one of them, and then the stuff going on at South Pole being a whole other batch of nefarious technology that makes HARP look like a pea shooter.
It's very difficult to come up with opinions when you're really not presented all of the information. And in many respects, in the fields that we research, dealing with the paranormal, the supernatural, and even of these more secret type projects as well, there's so much information that is swept under the rug. And so it's very difficult for us to conclude a full blown best opinion ever when we're just not given all that information.
Hmm. That's correct. And discernment is challenging nowadays as well because people don't really have the experiences to do that. Society has built a whole bunch of specialists now, so people don't feel empowered to know things like they used to. Everybody's a specialist now, so they feel like, oh well, I only know this one thing, so if somebody else says something, I better just believe them. Well, that's a slippery slope.
It really is. And one thing that I can definitely blame would be cell phones. We're always having all this information at our fingertips, but many of us do not utilize it correctly. We
Hmm.
could we could be geniuses, but
Hmm.
instead we're stuck in this entertainment malaise of just, oh, I
Hmm.
want to be pleased. I want to have a good time and be lazy. When in reality, so many of us are given the
Hmm.
opportunity to research the things that really catch our interest or that can help humanity in the future.
You're right. Here's an interesting aspect of society, and I'm not. This is an observation. It's an observation of humanity because now we have smartphones. Way back when people used to know things, now they don't. It's obvious. Every time they grab their phone, they identify as not knowing something. If you have to grab your phone to look something up, you're proving you don't know it. You have to go look for the information. If you knew it, you would say it. That would be being intelligent. Every time somebody grabs their phone to prove something, they're proving how much they don't know something. It's a sad state of the world that we're in right now. But this is what everybody does. We have dialogues with people, and all of a sudden the phones are involved. And what is that proving? It's proving that somebody in the dialogue doesn't know what they're talking about and has to look it up. We didn't used to be this way. We used to be the smart thing, not the device.
That is
I
so
challenge
true.
people. I challenge people to start thinking again. Have dialogues without the technology and watch your intelligence grow.
100% agree. Shifting gears a little bit, have you come across stories of the Natinak, the Alaskan Bigfoot?
I have heard stories about it myself, and I've also heard of a shapeshifter, which is new to me. But I've heard firsthand testimony from people that I can't really discount what they were saying. So yeah, it's very interesting to me this paranormal concept of Alaska. There's a lot going on up here that I certainly can't explain, and I'm not quick to throw stones at other people's firsthand testimony when that's their experiences.
Just now you mentioned a shapeshifter. Can you go into more detail on that? What stories did you encounter?
You got it, Christina. There was a gentleman that I worked with recently who was telling me that they were out fishing off some islands here in Alaska in a remote area. And they were passing by a relatively remote island and they saw somebody on shore waving them in to come get them. And the person said, oh, look, that's my grandfather over there. Let's go get him. And then somebody else, had the wherewithal apparently to say, "No, that's your why would your grandfather be out here on the island? Your grandfather's back in town." So they all decided to not go near whatever it was that they saw. And then when they went back to town, lo and behold, the grandfather was not on the island, but was back in town. So they believe what they saw was one of these shapeshifters pretending to be the grandfather.
That's kind of scary. I
It is
mean,
kind of creepy.
I've heard a few stories like that, especially those that are paranormal investigators, where this entity will mimic what their loved ones may sound like. And I have so many questions when I hear stories like this. For instance, these entities that are able to shapeshift to a loved one or mimic what a loved one would say, it seems that, and this is based off of my limited knowledge, that somehow they're able to tap into your thoughts or maybe even your consciousness in order to replicate what you hold dear to you. So, do you have an idea of how that's possible?
I would imagine something like that does have to be going on because in that capacity, with the boat just simply passing by, I mean, how much time does this thing have to figure stuff out? So either it's ascertaining it at the moment, or it's somehow ascertained it beforehand. That that's the only thing that I could think of. There's really only two possibilities following my own lines of logic and reasoning. Is that this thing knew something that wasn't communicated to it directly.
That's what I find so interesting. It could
Hmm.
also be very well that many of us carry our thoughts, emotions, and memories on our shoulders. We're naturally very noisy creatures in the mind. It's very
Hmm.
difficult for many of us to have a meditative mindset or to be mindful. So, another possibility could be that these entities are just kind of pulling off just the outside of what someone may be possibly thinking, kind of like the trash on the outside of you in a sense when it comes to thoughts. I'm not too sure. I never
Hmm.
really thought in depth of it, but just now you're really piquing my imagination on something like this.
No, I think you're 100% right. I think it's that and probably so much more with great ease, actually. I think that we ourselves have probably fallen from this point that we used to integrate in a similar fashion and communicate things and be on such energy waves as well. I think that might be what some of the stuff biblically was talking about the fall of man, is that it could be on that energetic level. Like maybe 5D to 4D to 3D type thing. And that, we're just maybe we're on a 3D level, and if a 4D creature comes by, maybe they read every freaking thought in our head. There's no reason that I would think otherwise. It could be that simple for something else. Us looking at an ant colony, we kind of feel like we're really smart compared to that, and that we could figure it out really quickly. And it's probably true. So I imagine, just like every other schoolyard, there's always a bigger, tougher kid out there. I'm sure there's also a bigger, wiser intellect, or some ability to engage the environment better than we can, that would make us look foolish really fast.
That could be the case. And something that you just said is imagining, and I'm paraphrasing here and then I'm interpreting it a little bit different. But if we look at an anthill, we have a totally different perspective. We can see so much farther than what an ant can see and how they perceive their anthill. So that could
Hmm.
be the same case with these different types of entities. For example, this shapeshifter that you mentioned a little bit earlier, maybe they're able to see a slightly bigger picture that at this point in time in humanity's evolution, we simply cannot do that.
Hmm. Yeah,
Well,
I
yeah.
agree. I think that it's again techniques potentially from old that maybe some of the mystery schools were trying to keep in our society, that we might have fallen from even such graces of their academia. But I think there's a lot of indications in antiquity that show that we used to be a bit more special than we are right now.
That may be the case. Eric, I have one final question for you. For those that want to visit Alaska, what locations would you recommend to visit either for research or for sightseeing?
Ooh, well, Anchorage, Alaska is pretty much the heart of the transportation hub. So they often say that, because in Alaskan terms, that Anchorage is the big city. They'll say that if you get to Anchorage, it's not really Alaska, but Alaska's 20 minutes away. So I would say, for all practical purposes, if folks came to Anchorage, it would be a great base of operations for them to go throughout and see the rest of Alaska. But what folks need to consider is that the state of Alaska is pretty much one third the size of the lower 48, the 48 contiguous states down south of Canada. Alaska's huge. So if people really want to come see Alaska, it's not so much where they land that's important. It's about how much time they allot. Alaska is not someplace that you can see fast. I really recommend you spend a few weeks up here. It just is what it is. And I know to some people it might seem like a few weeks of traveling is challenging and expensive, but you'll be surprised. Traveling can be a frugal way of living your life.
And that is my vision for the future, traveling the United States and hitting all those fantastic hotspots. Eric, thank you so much for being on the show today. Where can people find you online to stay up to date with your research?
The best place for them to stay up to date with my research, Christina, would be at deciphering.tv. And they can reach me. There's an email contact there if they have any information to share. That would be really appreciated. I'm trying to connect the dots with everybody. I do also have a YouTube page where I have the title Deciphering My Experience, where I put some of the more benign stuff out there that, the censors don't really care about. But more or less, it's the website deciphering.tv.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Christina.
You're listening to the UNX Network, KUNX-DB, Kansas City, Missouri.
Being able to hear from someone that has actually been to Antarctica and stayed there has really blown my mind. Not only that, but Eric had his own UFO experience while he was there as well. And while Antarctica is fascinating with a lot of history and legends, due to the extreme cold, I'm not sure if I would just casually want to go there. I would need to have a goal or a purpose, along with mapping out what tasks I would need to fulfill. But there are other places that I would go in a heartbeat, such as Utah. And as soon as I have enough saved to buy an RV, that is going to be my very first destination. I would travel on Route 666, go to the cursed Escalante Petrified Forest, hit up the Uinta Basin, and jump into some hot springs. If you could go anywhere on Earth, where would you go? I would like to mention that my new show, Strange Paradigms, will be airing live every Friday at 3 p.m. PST, where I cover paranormal and mysterious news headlines of the week, sometimes on my own, and other times with a guest co-host. This Friday's co-host will be Jane Kyle, better known as UFO Jane. So make sure to hit the notification bell if you're watching this on YouTube. I want to wish you all a wonderful week. Please like this video or podcast on your platform of choice and share it with those who have the same interest. Subscribe if you haven't already, because there's a lot more great shows coming to you soon. Be safe and remember, keep your eyes on the skies.